welcome. Welcome to all and everyone, and especially welcome to all the audience we have in the live stream. We are here now in the 8th evening of Young Researchers at Dokkhuset in Trondheim. You will meet 5 guests who will give us different perspectives on the challenge, stories about tomorrow. Which voices govern our future? After the 5, there will be an intermission of 10 minutes and then a Q&A. But first, I will introduce to you Monica Rolfsen, who will put the sustainability research program in NTNU into a broader context. She is Pro-Rector for Outreach and Social Responsibility at NTNU. Please, Monica, stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So welcome to this evening, where young and aspiring researchers will share their knowledge and research on topics that are of great importance to all of us and to our global community. In the public conversation and research about sustainability, the emphasis is usually on technology and simplified political solutions that often do not work very well in practice. This evening's speakers come from different disciplines, different departments all over NTNU, but they are all concerned with how our future is shaped by different and often conflicting stories about sustainability. Stories, as we know, engage our emotions and affect our social behavior. Narratives about sustainability, climate, and the future are present everywhere. It is therefore important to understand how this influences politics, activism, media images, and popular culture. At NTNU, many researchers from various departments and disciplines are working really hard to find sustainable solutions. And what we did at NTNU in 2021 was that we established a strategic research initiative which we called Sustainability Research at NTNU. The short word is SUSRES, where altogether 47 young researchers work together in 11 interdisciplinary projects. These projects all address transformative changes needed to achieve a sustainable society. Tonight, we will pay a visit to 3 out of the 11 projects in NTNU's Strategic Research Initiative within Sustainability, SUSRES. And at NTNU, we are very proud of all our young researchers, and it's therefore a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome you to this evening, where you will hear some stories from our passionate and talented scientists, as they will present important challenges, some results perhaps, and they will present how they work in their different projects. So have a nice evening.
Thank you, Monica. Hania Mushiol will introduce us to the importance and use of narratives in the environmental field. She's a professor of literature and distinguished educator. She leads Narrating Sustainability and other projects about environmental storytelling and justice at NTNU. Welcome to Hania.
Thank you for the introduction, Randy. Welcome. It's such a pleasure to see so many of you here today. Indeed, my name is Hania Mushiol, and I am a professor of literature, transmedia storytelling, and human rights. But what this means in practice is that I come from the wounded landscape of unsustainability stories, of people's grief and ecological devastation. But there are also great days in my professional life. There are moments that are very precious, like today, which is, while I'm not a young researcher, I am honored by the opportunity to introduce you to junior scholars at NTNU who are doing knowledge differently. They will take you on a journey across the world, but also across disciplines: political science, science and technology, environmental humanities, environmental psychology, science and technology studies, and many others, reminding you about what we can learn when we engage with people in all tax brackets who do not look like us, in all kinds of bodies across the world, and what happens if we learn from the experiential stories of climate crisis, economic deprivation, and, of course, resistance, as well as creativity, as well as generosity, as well as care and adaptation and innovation. Theo Martin, Parisa Chokrai, Isabel Munoz, and Xiaofui Chen will also put the uncomfortable spotlight on us, the researchers, because we also work in a story factory, which is the university. And we have a tremendous responsibility for the stories we send out into the world. So, of course, you didn't sign up for an evening in a book club, so you're probably wondering, what does fiction or poetry or novels have to do with the serious business of research and these ecological or sustainability solutions? And of course, the answer is they have a whole lot to do with it. People's stories, testimonies matter tremendously in moments of environmental crises, in moments of energy transition transformations. They document, they make us feel things, and they also change the law. They are a future-making tool. Marco Armiero, who is an environmental historian, reminds us that a novel, a poem, a song can have and have had a tremendous social knowledge impact. And just because in the neoliberal system we don't know how to place these things called art, we don't know how to measure their worth, doesn't make them irrelevant. But of course, even if you're not a lover of books, we all experience the world and relate to it through stories. You might be chilling in Trondheim, and you will experience something and learn something about ecological changes in Iceland, about melting glaciers, through a transmedia exhibit that was presented in front of Adressaparken. Or you will learn about the relationship between meat production and deforestation in the Amazon from a flyer designed by an architect and scholar, Aida Miron. I'm sure all of you are familiar with what's happening in LA and the forest and the fires and the toxic pollution. All of this arrives to us through representations, through images, such as this one from Grist, which I find particularly interesting. Abraham Verghese, actually stories are also part of our biosphere, our knowledge ecosystem, so they're as important, what Ngugi wa Thiong'o says, as the air we breathe. Abraham Verghese, who is a physician, a Stanford professor of medicine, and also a very important writer, reminds us also that writing itself is a vital sign that doctors check for example, in a hospital if you had a stroke. So I think that this is something to remember, that stories, the written ones and the spoken, are actually a vital sign of our well-being, of our individual and global planetary well-being. They're the pulse of it. The pulse, of course, is off. Phenomenal architect Rania Gauzen says climate crisis is not just a breakdown of physical Earth systems, it's also a challenge to the stories, images, drawings, and systems through which we relate to the Earth and, of course, to each other. This is very important to remember because ecologists now understand that the climate crisis is not just a technopolitical crisis, it's a crisis of storytelling, crisis of imagination, and a crisis of affect. To survive, Anne's saying, on this damaged planet, and her collaborators would say, we need the combined arts of storytelling and observation, science, technology, art, and poetry. Gauzen continues, how we intervene, right, into the crisis has a lot to do with how we imagine it. Because stories structure our understanding of possible solutions and of the future we want to build, but also of the time we don't have. Unfortunately, besides NTNU sustainability research area, which gave opportunities to these brilliant scholars on the panel, limited attention is given to sustainability storytelling and story making. I think it's quite telling that on my research journey to Poland, out of all places, I've learned that a very famous school of reportage at the School of Journalism there enlists poet and fiction writers to teach journalists and scientists how to tell compelling stories about the future. In other words, more equitable and less lethal futures, if you want them, we need to not only learn more about other stories, we also need to create spaces to experiment together, to practice more caring ways of listening in order to engage in what I call the narrative repair of the world. And here are some snapshots of this very invisible labor that really was first about creating spaces of togetherness where we can co-create stories. Lawyers, environmental humanists, biologists, refugee academics, artists, community members. This dates back to prehistory, 2017 and on, and it continues pretty much every year. More recently, we've engaged in, again, under the leadership of an environmental legal historian in these practices of co-writing futuristic stories, 20 people at the time, trying to get together and tell a story of ocean in the future. Here, we flip the script. Isabel will be talking about this a little bit more. We have an encounter between Mapuche and the Sami activists who are actually teaching, not learning from, but teaching students and academics at NTNU a lot about environmental devastation and about what happens during the unjust energy transitions. Fresh off the grill, as we could say, against research monoculture, sometimes we enter a different realm and we tell stories through visual media. And here we are in a workshop led by Victoria Bogdanova, who's architect and poet, trying to teach us how to do these emotive maps of Trondheim ecologies. Absolutely stunning. I would love to tell you what happens also when a biologist walks into a poetry reading. That was also quite fascinating. Sometimes we leave the university altogether and work for specific communities, as we did in Tampere, where our job was to engage in a rapid response intervention, do research, as we scholars do, traditional research, collection of interviews, creation of a database, and then we walked at midnight, reading poetry in multiple languages, scholars, designers, architects, policymakers, developers, as well as skaters and graffiti writers. I would never underestimate the power of these social rituals. We need more of those. Without them, there is no better storytelling for better futures. Here, of course, NTNU does an amazing job. We, with our collaborators, teach PhD courses, and I think we broke the bank last year with 40 students, which we're not even able, basically, to contain, across disciplines, industrial ecology, anthropology, psychology, design, architecture, any discipline you can name of, trying to learn how to do transmedia storytelling together in a very short time span. And I think another final maybe example is, of course, a big shout out to students, because students know and they teach us that stories are not just decorations, they're not just scars, they're not just wounds, they are actually portals to other worlds. The speakers whose work you will listen to in a moment, they listen to stories and think very carefully about those stories. They pay attention to who tells stories and how and where, and they often start with a very basic research question. Who narrates the story of solution? Who stars in the fiction of progress and who gets sacrificed and abandoned? Or more simply, in Armero's words, who makes trash and who gets it? Who makes an ecological mess and who has to pay for it and endure its consequences? They understand that sustainability research has to be transdisciplinary, that it has to blend science and the arts, that it has to be inside and outside academia. They also know that it has to include diverse storytellers from around the world. And they also know that this work is frustrating, difficult, challenging, often invisible, but never, never, never meaningless. To conclude, I want us to think that addressing complexities of our ecological moment requires all disciplines and all solitaires and all hands on deck, not just in someone's pocket, right? Especially the corporate pockets. Let's remember also that the function of public education, and that includes NTNU's, of course, mission, is to not simply produce, manufacture workers, it's to nurture global, reflective, conscious, responsible, empathetic global citizens. These junior scholars who are sitting here and whom we invite on stage in a moment, listen to the pulse of global well-being. They listen to diverse sustainability stories critically, empathetically, ethically. They also show us how other stories and global knowledge communities we routinely ignore in our research are part of the sustainable and future story solutions we seek. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hanja. There will be a computer change here while we introduce the next. Theo Martin investigates the major research program in sustainability at NTNU. That means this SUSRES program that we are doing here and presenting. He maps how researchers from different disciplines build solutions to complex sustainability challenges. He also observes whether and how insight into the contributions of different disciplines can help us deal with an environmental crisis. Theo comes from Lyon in France, and he is a PhD candidate in political science at NTNU. Welcome to Theo.
Good evening, everyone. It's working. This is not working. Sorry. No worries. Yeah. And duplicate. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Theo. I'm a PhD candidate trained in the political sciences, and I do research about research. I study what new knowledge we think we need to solve the environmental crisis and how my colleague scientists make it. For 4 years, I study a group of researchers. Here they are, and here I am in the back. They come from multiple fields, and they try to combine their expertise to solve a wide range of sustainability issues. I learned from them and their experience, and I hope I can help them too, them and the next generation of researchers. Tonight is about stories, and the story of the role of science, of research and research policy in solving the environmental crisis is a crucial one. So now I will walk you through how I came to realize that and what I have found so far. So as a student, I realized I became increasingly aware of the environmental crisis and the limits of our development model. So I wanted to understand how we can organize society better to address these complex and interconnected issues like climate change, biodiversity destruction, social and environmental injustice. So I decided to do development studies, and I discovered the field of political ecology. And from this field, I learned that with most environmental issues, we have a knowledge problem. We often don't capture their complexity enough, and we are blind to part of their causes and impacts. I want to illustrate that with a case that most of us tonight have probably heard about. Right across the fjord, the controversy around the Fosen wind farm. So we know we have a global problem with carbon emissions, and the Norwegian state wants to build wind power. From their perspective, here seems to be an available land because nothing is really built already, and environmental protection laws don't prevent building wind power there. So the land can be used to support national energy policy. But on this land also live local Sami communities, and for them, the land is not empty. Its biodiversity and aesthetics have important cultural meaning, and is also central for their economic activity of herding reindeer, which the wind farms would both damage. But in policymaking, not all knowledge has an equal weight, nor is invited to the table. Some knowledge, life worlds, and interests are prioritized over others. And my colleagues will later tonight tell you more about these other stories. But in this case, like hundreds of cases around the world, the policy-making process initially did not take into account, did not consider enough the perspective of these local communities, what the land meant for them, and their economy. Because decision makers tend to prioritize scientific knowledge, which comes in majority from the global north, from universities, research institutes, and the industry as well, over the local ways of knowing and using the land. Moreover, more of this scientific research tends to be funded on the technical aspects of the crisis, for instance, on technologies that can help secure growth and cleaner growth if possible. And although that might sound like, or some of it is a good thing, the issue is that these political preferences shape what we end up knowing and not knowing about the crisis. And this can lead to sidelining some of the social causes and impacts. Direct consequence, in the case of the Fosen wind farm, it led to a social and legal conflict that the Norwegian state eventually lost. The important takeaway here with this case is that what we think to be a solution for sustainability, like wind power, can in fact create new sustainability problems. And so if policymakers are more likely to call on us scientists, then we must make sure that the knowledge that we give back to them exposes this complexity, that some stories are not missing from the picture. And one way to do that is to integrate diverse knowledge together when we work on solutions for sustainability, when we do sustainability research. Say we want to build a wind farm. If we bring in a biologist, then impact on ecosystem becomes part of this story. If we bring in a social geographer, we can see people's energy need, beyond the scientific disciplines even. If we bring in the industry, we can see logistical capacities. We bring in indigenous communities, and we can anticipate potential harms and conflicts. This means doing science differently, beyond the borders of a single disciplinary field, beyond the current terrain of science. We generally call this interdisciplinary research, but as you can imagine, this is not easy. So how do we do that in practice? To find out, I turned the look to NTNU and the sustainability research initiative that was presented to you briefly in the introduction. It gathers over 100 researchers that are distributed across all of NTNU's faculty. You can see here that each dot is a researcher. The goal of my research is to study this initiative and its scientists. These scientists themselves are distributed across 10 or 11 interdisciplinary research projects where most of the research activity happens, but the SUSRES initiative program also offers program activities like training in interdisciplinary collaboration, for instance. As you can see, yeah, they all focus on one particular sustainability problem that they're trying to solve from many different perspectives. And if we dive a little into how one of these projects is structured like the Sustainable Hydropower Project, you can see the different fields and expertises that can be combined together. So what I want to figure out is whether and how these collaborations manage to make scientific knowledge differently. And to do that, I have interviews with these researchers. I ask them how they do their work, how they experience working together with colleagues who often speak completely different scientific languages and have different scientific stories about what a sustainable future is and how to get there. I asked them whether that shed new light on their own research and field, or if that just makes it more difficult. I'm also interested in the conditions in which they work and what they can do as a result or not do. For instance, what scientific questions the publishers and the funders encourage them to focus on, with what methods, what quantity and quality of results is expected from them, with what costs and rewards for their careers. And here is one of the overarching issues that these scientists say they experience when trying to do this interdisciplinary research, making knowledge differently. It takes time. It took time to find partners from other scientific disciplines and professional sectors. It takes time to build trust, understand each other, to challenge what you take for granted in your day-to-day work. And it takes time to combine expertise and try to make transformative knowledge. But time is often little, and so is funding. And so a funded program like NTNU's opens a rare space for trying to experiment making transformative knowledge. But still, time and external pressure to do science as usual or to fit sustainability stories from national governments and European agencies, for instance, remains obstacles. And yet, even in these conditions, the scientists of the SUSRES managed to bring in their fields, drawing on the expertise of their colleagues, innovative methods. They built new softwares, new end-of-life processes for diverse materials. They shed new light on how species adapt to the crisis. They brought attention to marginalized communities, their stories, and their solutions. They advocated this knowledge to policymakers, and some of our colleagues were even heard at the Norwegian Parliament. They engaged in the public debate. With more time and more career security, they could probably have done even more. And with my PhD, I explore how we can make it easier for scientists to collaborate interdisciplinary and to make the academic system support rather than discourage doing science differently. So how can we make better knowledge for sustainability? We need to make time for experimenting, doing this transformative research. We also need to make room for people to participate in science, to share their stories, to suggest what new knowledge we need and how to collaborate towards it. Because in our work too, we need to be the society that we want to build, and we need to care for what others build, what others know and what they can bring to the table. So it is about institutions like NTNU taking risks by funding a program like SUSRES. It can be about us, researchers, building community at our place of work and outside, here and across continents. And it can also be about the public, trusting the work of researchers and joining it, supporting it through vote, and sharing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. Now you will meet Parisa Shokrai. She focuses her research on perception, experience, and response to environmental crisis. She will also talk about established methodological standards within psychology and discuss alternative approaches that might make research more inclusive and just. Parisa comes from Germany and is a PhD candidate in environmental psychology at NTNU. Parisa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Randy, for introducing me, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I would like to tell you something about methods and how they shape our stories. But first of all, I want to show you one of my main habitats as a PhD student in psychology, traveling to conferences and summer schools by train, because for me as an environmentalist, it just feels better not to fly. And when I'm not on the track, I'm trying to keep track with my PhD in environmental psychology. What is environmental psychology, and what do I actually do as a psychologist in this field? Well, environmental psychology is very interdisciplinary and broad-based. Roughly speaking, it's about the relationships between the natural, built, or social environment and the perceptions, experiences, and behaviors of people living in it. Overall, knowledge we gain from environmental psychology can be useful when we want to invent new interventions to foster pro-environmental behaviors. This can happen on an individual or on a social level, for example, in companies and schools, or more generally as a tool for practitioners and activists. Our knowledge is also increasingly requested by policymakers when they are planning measures to tackle the climate crisis. My own research focuses on perceptions and experiences of the climate change and how people behave in response to it. A second main research question is how my research could become more just and inclusive. How does this look like more concretely? Well, in the beginning of my PhD crusade, I tried to investigate narratives like political discourses of sustainability and stories and see what kind of stories can foster or hinder pro-environmental behaviors. It seemed quite promising to me because our everyday lives are permeated by stories. Independent of whom we are or what we do, stories exist in all cultures, and they also have developed a specific relevance in all cultures because they give us meaning, and by doing so, they also affect our behaviors. Here's an example for an everyday life story. Climate protection costs millions of jobs. As someone who is working in insecure jobs, permanently threatened by unemployment, I might feel even more under threat when I read such stories. And I might not be very happy about measures about the climate crisis. If, on the other hand, I would read much more often stories like this, I might be more convinced that my personal situation could improve if I and also the society would behave in a more climate-friendly way. Stories not only help us to orientate us and ourselves in the world, they can also help us to understand better how the reality of marginalized groups look like and how a good and sustainable life would look for them. And besides, I wanted also to mention that in two of my current PhD studies, I and my very much appreciated colleague, Professor Silje Christiansen, are investigating news stories and their effects on psychological processes and behavior. In my very first PhD study, I conducted a workshop with school children, or actually high school students, I would rather say, because I wanted to investigate whether storytelling can help us to better understand very complex relationships, for example, those between climate crisis and democracy, and whether this better understanding could also lead to enhanced pro-environmental behaviors. For this purpose, the life cycle of a chocolate bar was told using a story. I also applied questionnaires, and the students worked in small groups on topics like the links between climate justice and climate crisis, and they also visualized their findings in mind maps. And here you can see one of their amazing outcomes of their research. Apart from the question of what can motivate people to behave in a more climate-friendly way, I wanted to make my research also more just and inclusive. Because for as good and useful our established methods are, I increasingly felt that they were not comprehensive enough to really cover or uncover all relevant stories. Why do I think that? Well, first of all, we exclude many groups of people from our research, especially the vulnerable and marginalized ones. And despite of this fact, we tend to generalize and transfer our findings to all populations, justifying this by saying, well, after all, we are all human beings, and that our dominant Eurocentristic research standards have the best quality standards such as objectivity and universality. Further, by excluding so many groups of people, we marginalize also other knowledges. And when we then build and develop interventions based on these supposedly universal methods, we can sometimes cause more harm than benefit. And one example of such an intervention that at least partly backfired was the granting of microcredits to Maasai women in order to empower them, lifting them out of poverty. Dutt and colleagues showed that those women who were organized with other women together in cooperatives benefited quite well from these programs. In contrast, women who ran their businesses entirely on their own ended up in even worse living conditions, and sometimes even in comparison to those women who did not receive any credits at all. And this difference, or the reason for why this intervention had such different effects, was only provided by including local knowledges. And this is only a very small example that shows how crucial other than Eurocentristic knowledges are. And Xiao Fui will tell another example about this. So how could research then become more just and inclusive? Well, we do not have to reinvent new methods to produce knowledge beyond our scope of the established methodologies we have. We only have to stop ignoring or oppressing other knowledges and untold stories. We have to bring them up, make them visible by including relevant populations and their expertise in common research. Common research would start with building relationships and real cooperations with those communities that are affected by our research questions. Theo just talked about the challenges here. We need to go beyond the idea of universally valid research standards. Instead, embracing to unlearn, discovering the unseen, and to listen to those voices that have been silenced or overheard for too long and too often so far. Try to learning in the way like others know, and go away from the way we are used to know things. This has been one of the most important lessons I've learned so far during my PhD journey, seeking for answers on how to make my own research more equitable and just. And sometimes we also have to accept that not everything is measurable at all in a way we define measuring. Isabel will show some examples of how this can look like. So to sum up, the knowledge we acquire in science and the stories we tell upon these knowledges depend on the methods we use. And in turn, the methods we use and the way we use them depend on the standards of knowledge production and the way we as researchers are socialized. And in this respect, also future scientists and decision makers should learn new approaches to gain knowledge, and this way enabling them to tell new and different stories that have not been told yet enough, if at all. Thank you very much, and I also would like to express my deep gratitude to a lot of people that brought me here tonight and during my PhD. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Parisa. We have now heard 3 different perspectives, and here comes the 4th one. Isabel Munoz is born in Cuba and has worked passionately as an environmental activist and writer. Her motivation is to find ways of making environmental narratives more interdisciplinary, inclusive, and just. She bases her research on the Caribbean and Norway and discusses how different forms of storytelling provide us with deeper understanding, critical hope to reimagine sustainable futures. Isabel is a PhD candidate in environmental humanities and literature at NTNU. Please, the stage is yours.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me? Yes, wonderful. Yes, thank you, Randy, for this wonderful introduction. And yes, my name is Isabel. I'm a literature scholar, so as many of you can already imagine, my work consists mostly of reading books. I'm interested in stories, and as many of my colleagues have already expressed, stories that are within the books, in movies, we hear in the news, but also the stories that are part of our world, the way we experience the world, the anecdotes that shape what we are. So I want to begin actually with a self-reflection. What are the stories that are part of your world? What stories brought you here? Was it friendship, curiosity, collaboration? Today, you're going to hear a little bit more about my PhD story, which has mostly to do with many academic institutions, all the way from Cuba to Norway. So here at NTNU, I work as a very atypical sustainability researcher. I'm interested in stories about sustainability, and perhaps you already know the most well-known one, universal framework given by NTNU, by the UN in the 80s, when they defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. And nothing has captured our imagination more than the future. Perhaps you're already familiar with these ideas of highly technological utopias with flying cars and endless energy supplies that are going to render all problems obsolete, providing a steady path for growth and progress. Very nice. However, in my own experience as a Caribbean person, this really clashes with our lived realities. Every year, we experience the many natural phenomena that are now worsening due to climate change. So in the Caribbean, stories about sustainability are going to look a little bit different. First of all, we're interested about the present and the future, yes, but also about the past and the environmental histories that have brought us here in the first place. We're also interested about interconnections. What does it mean burning Norwegian oil for the life on these islands? But these are not stories about victimhood, quite the opposite. I think these are stories to actually understand how to grapple with a world of growing crisis that looks a little bit more like this, interconnected, cyclic, and messy, than this, linear, straightforward. So in my PhD, I'm interested in Caribbean stories. And this, as you can see, is the actual wall in my office. I'm interested in these Caribbean stories, localizing them and analyzing them. That's most of my academic work. And they consist of books, books of poetry, novel, essays, etc., but also lived experiences of many communities, as you can see here in this example of women farmers surviving storms in Dominica. So I'm interested in the way that they bring a very unique Caribbean experience, while at the same time, they actually enable us to rethink the way we do sustainability work. Let me give you one example. Jamaican storyteller Nala Hopkinson brings in the short story Repatriation a scenario of devastation in Jamaica. The island has been mostly destroyed. However, the inhabitants are able to rebuild the island, not with foreign, highly sophisticated technologies, no, but using instead local technologies of biorock, which is an actual technology being developed now in the Caribbean to grow coral reefs from old metal infrastructures. So this is really interesting because it showed us that there is a deep understanding in Caribbean stories of the interconnection between human and non-human to guarantee mutual survival. So in these stories, we learned about alliances with other species, alliances across genres, across discipline, fiction and nonfiction. So these stories have also shaped and influenced the other part of the work that I do as a PhD. I've become increasingly interested in enabling and creating spaces for storytelling and story listening. In 2022, for example, I co-organized an event on women and sustainability in which we discussed important questions such as, how can a city be sustainable if it doesn't account for the access, for the safety of some of its vulnerable population? Surprisingly, on the other side of the world here in Norway, we were having similar conversations. How can we think about sustainable development if energy transitions does not take into account the needs and desires of indigenous communities? So for this, together with colleagues from Anthropology and Latin America Grupene, in 2023, we hosted this historical event in which Mapuche communities and Sami communities, like Hania already mentioned, came together, and we practiced collaboration and solidarity, reflecting on the challenges of green infrastructures in indigenous territories. But also, within this practice, we were rejecting this narrative of progress that, as one of the Mapuche leaders reflected, is a progress of misery, reflecting on the loss of biodiversity and the loss of access to local and cultural resources for these communities. So instead, we chose technologies of caring and listening to each other. And this brings me to my last year. In 2024, I've been meeting regularly with colleagues from NTNU's Art Academy, and we have discussed the different ways that we can create futures through storytelling methods. This has been very interesting, especially because during NTNU's Artistic Research Week, we were able to test some of these ideas through a storytelling game. So in this event, we invited people from Trondheim, practitioners, to share the ideas and their experiences and to reclaim their agency in creating futures for the city where they live in Trondheim. Questions such as, what would it be like if wind farms are installed in the middle of the city, your home? What would happen if the relationship between Norway and salmon and Norway and other species would radically be altered? What would you do? So these were some of the examples and the scenarios that we put forward to really move and stimulating a conversation on collective storytelling. This is also interesting because I think bringing back to my initial question of what stories are part of your world, we can also think, how can those stories become part of making different worlds? Worlds that are truly sustainable, and this is not the sustainability owned by tech companies or neoliberal designs, but actually sustainability made by us. They're just, diverse, inclusive, and they can also account for all the many, many different stories that as humans we have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Now we go to a total different part of the world, of the globe. Xiaofui Chen comes from tropical Malaysia. She was a journalist for 14 years before adventuring into sustainable energy transition research. She investigates dilemmas between indigenous concerns and hydropower development. Her key driver is to initiate society-wide discussions and on vital policy issues and foreground the voice of marginalized groups. Which local and global consequences occur when implementing hydropower projects in Norway and Malaysia? What does it take to make hydropower development and governance sustainable and just in Norway and Malaysia? Xiaofui is a PhD candidate in the science and technology studies in NTNU. Please, the stage is yours.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you, Randy. Good evening. I'm Xiaofui. I study sustainability in hydropower from the social science and humanities perspective. Part of my research is to get the indigenous people's view on justice in hydropower development in Norway and Malaysia. The title of my talk today are International Principles Enough to Ensure Social Sustainability. So this was me in 2010. I was a journalist at the time. I was traveling to the inland area of Sarawak, talking to the indigenous people impacted by the Bakun hydropower dam project. This trip has changed me tremendously and brought me here today. This is the map of Sarawak. Today, I'm going to bring you on a trip to my field site, the Murum hydropower project, located at the Upper Rajang River Basin. So now, imagine you are sitting in a four-wheel truck. There are oil palm trees on your left and on your right side. You are on a gravel road, and the road is bumpy, and after a long, long while, you come to this open water body. What a refreshing sight. You notice something interesting. There are many sticks coming out from the water. What are they? They were once trees in a thick forest. This is a forest that is submerged under the water. This is the reservoir of the Murum hydropower project. I took this photo when on my way to the Metalun resettlement area. So under the water includes the burial graves of the Penan's ancestors. The Penan is a group of semi-nomadic tribe live in this region for at least 200 years. So 1,400 of Penan and Kenya were moved to 2 resettlement areas for this hydropower project. These Penan select the resettlement site themselves. They are being engaged by the government to do so. They select the area because it used to be part of their ancestral land, and more importantly, there was a thick forest for them. So, according to the ethnography produced for this social and environmental impact assessment, the forest is the most important place for the Penans, not only for food and plant, but also for their connection with their ancestors. The Penans' history is written in the landscape. Their ancestors walked the land, claim it, and pass it down to the next generation. This information was collected according to the free, prior, and informed consent principle. as required under the Equator Principle and the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. This principle ensures that any development on the ancestral land of the indigenous people must obtain their consent without any coercion. So this information was recorded in this okay. Okay. So when they move into this area, since they picked the area, they should be happy, right? Because this is part of their ancestral land. They are happy at the beginning because they have a new house and water and electricity. But later, this company came in, Danone Sina Sdn Bhd, cleared the forest for oil palm plantation. A Penan from Matahlon told me, before the logging and plantation companies came, the forest was thick. We could find animals or vegetables. When we moved to the Matahlon in 2013, the plantation company also came and the area was destroyed. Where can we find animals or resources in the forest? They live 6 hours from the nearest town. They lost their forest with very few job prospects, but they didn't give up. Some managed to secure a job with the same company that cleared their forests for oil palm plantation. But last year, 126 of them were laid off. I can understand why they are bitter. Before the dam, they were rich. They can easily access to forests to get food and resources, but now they are being thrown into a cycle of poverty, struggling to adapt to a life run by money. They were once hopeful that the move could lead to a better life with easy, accessible healthcare and better education for their children. But now they feel that they are being used and cheated. After 10 years, they still haven't gotten the clinic promised to them. Do they think it is fair? A young Matahlon told me there has been no change after 11 years here. The facilities and infrastructure they promised are not here. Therefore, to me, it is not just, because all the profit are for them, not us. If they thought about us, they would have fulfilled their promises. You may think that, well, this is a story that happened in Malaysia or other countries in the global south, right? Maybe you can think again. So, Norway has its own Alta-saken in the 1970s, and the Fosen-saken recently, as mentioned by Theo just now. Despite the past lesson from the Alta, the Fosen case shows us that national energy policy is still the top priority. Why are these stories important? My goal today is not for you to pity them, but to really seize them. I want to circle back to my question at the beginning. Are international principles enough to ensure social sustainability? Social sustainability in this context means that everybody is benefit from hydropower development. Surely, following international principle is the beginning, but we have to ensure that there is a holistic plan for resettlement. So what is the solution then? If we must build more, we have to shift from a hydropower development model based on extraction and exploitation to a model based on long-term benefit sharing. This allows the indigenous community to have an easier transition to a life run on money, for them to build their skills and nurture the capacity of the next generation. The authority must also listen to their needs, preserve the forest as the safety net for them, ring-fence some profit for healthcare, education, infrastructure development, and maintenance. To me, respecting their way of life is fundamental. It shows that we care and we can shoulder each other for a sustainable future. As for me, My trip in 2010 bring me to Norway to do my PhD research. In turn, it also bring me back to Sarawak. After 14 years, I reconnected with my indigenous host during my visit in the Bakun Dam. He is my godfather now. He gave me a name, and the name is Puyang Miku. Terima kasih. Tusen tak.
Thank you, Xiaofui. Then we have reached through the lectures, and we will have a 10 minutes break. Please be back in 10 minutes, and then we will line up the candidates here, and we start thinking loudly was one description we got from the audience once, and that was used to be quite fruitful. So enjoy your intermission. Hello. Now we continue and pick up the thread from the 5 lectures we had. Could you please come and take your seat at the stage? And last visitor, close the door. Yeah, you can take a seat anywhere. We have 2 microphones here, so you have to give to it. Yeah, pass it around and give to each other. Yeah. Okay, and everybody get more supply of wine and beer and water. Thank you very much for very interesting perspectives and a good performance, we must say. I would like to start with a question to each and one of you, of the candidates. And we start with Xiaofui. You were talking about a sharing model with the benefits for. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what is this model about?
Hello? Yeah, so now in the scholarship, there are some research about what kind of benefit sharing model that is going to work in hydropower development. A lot of this research talking about, so far it has been more likely like a voluntary way, but it's not like a mandatory way. So first is maybe we need to think about, do we need to make it a mandatory? So this could be a plan that is discussed among the community with the developer, and then they draft it together. So it's like a co-production process where you come up with a way and you calculate the cost and how much you can ring fence and give back to the community for a long-term social development. Because a lot of these indigenous people, they are really living in this rural area. If you are moving them to an area that is nearer to a town or to this new lifestyle, they cannot survive without money. So you need to give them an easier transition to a new lifestyle. Because according even for the government of Malaysia, when they craft the resettlement action plan, they calculate that it requires 30 years for them to really transit to a lifestyle that is really relying on money. So this could be a kind of model that is co-produced by the indigenous community and the developer together.
Yeah. Theo, I would like to give the next question to you. When doing interdisciplinary collaboration, you explained that time is a challenge, but you also mentioned factors like external pressures. And so could you explain a little bit more about why interdisciplinarity sounds so difficult to succeed in practice?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, there are different orders of challenges. But just to jump on right away on these external pressures, I was referring to pressures that are not directly related to the research project as such and the collaboration when it's the case. And for instance, it can be very practical, maybe sometimes administrative requirement, which those researchers from the SUSRES program can experience as well, where they're supposed to collaborate together, but they have, because of the requirements for PhD education, for doctoral education, is to submit their thesis in a scientific a disciplinary field with some rules to follow, sometimes they have to abide by those rules, and it can leave little margin to try to do something else. So that's one of these external pressures. And then, of course, there is also, on a more political level, academia is governed in a more managerial way as well. We have to produce, our work is assessed by how much we produce. And then, of course, when we need to do interdisciplinary work, it will take more time to try to understand what's the perspective of the other person, if our knowledge can combine, and how. And so this time is a cost for the career of most researchers as well. So that's also how the more general political context of academic research can be that sort of external pressure, rendering interdisciplinary more difficult to do in practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Isabel, if sustainability can be so many things, how can we work together for common goals in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that is something that I've also been trying to grapple with, because when we have like these international frameworks, they have use, right? They're useful somehow. They use in giving us guidelines and finding like common charts, perhaps. At the same time, Xiaofui demonstrated like they're not enough. So for this idea of bringing different stories into sustainability, I'm actually very inspired from the work that some colleagues in Oslo have done in projects such as Co-Futures, in which the most important aspect of this line of thinking is to really remove the idea that the future is one thing, like the future is that thing and that's where we're going. No, the future can be many things, and we have like incredible power to alter these realities. So in a way, evoking like different futures and different modalities is just to expand our understanding and our perceptions of what a sustainable future can look like. And as we can see, sometimes they don't look the same, like one person of the other. However, there are principles such as composability, like can these things coexist? Like, do they cancel each other, or they can still like sort of coexist in a semi-friendly manner? So we need to find words, we need to find ways of negotiating radically these futures that can be different for many of us. But this is essential because the way that humanity also teaches us about the world is like there's so much complexity. So one line, one future, it's not perhaps the right answer on how to deal with a world that, as I also talked about, it's complex. So we need to grapple with this complexity, conversating with each other, putting these different ideas together in conversation, and finding common grounds, ultimately, in the process.
It's easy but still difficult, yeah. Parisa, you indicated that building relationships and the collaboration with the communities affected by your research would be an important first step. But what do you think is necessary to conduct research in the way that you suggested?
Thank you very much for this question, Randy. Yeah, I think there are two main sides to answer this question. First of all, I think it's more about the research process itself. But on the other hand, it's also a structural thing, right? Because, and I would maybe start with this latter one, because we as researchers, we have a specific framework in which our research can happen, actually. And this frame is usually very tight. So even if we use our established and well-known quantitative or qualitative methods, it's manageable, but it's like Theo also said, it's a very time-pressuring and it's doable, but we are expected to produce knowledge. Sometimes it feels like on an assembly line. And this, what I thought more about, is not happening in this time frame. We need, if we want to build relationships, we first of all need to build trust. And if we are talking about building up trust with communities, I'm talking predominantly about communities that do not really have a reason to trust us, because their experiences in the past is, Xiao Fui's example shows how trustful we are, even if we have global standards, right, for sustainable transformations. So we need time to build up trust and to really also show what can we provide them, not only extracting data and then detaching this data from the people and their living conditions, and then conducting some quantitative analysis and saying something that might be generally truth for a statistical portion of the population, but not for individuals. And I think this is something. And then when it comes to structure, it also has something to do with funding. We have to think about who is being funded at all, and whose voices, also scientific voices, are not funded and not heard. And I can only talk most or predominantly for psychology, but even the established qualitative methods in psychology are not as acknowledged as the quantitative ones, even though both have their right and exist for existence. But then if you want to conduct a project that really is time-consuming and really expensive, and then you also have to provide something in return, so the benefit is on both sides, not only for the researchers who extract data, then write their papers and get their high impact factors, but also give something back to the communities and ask them really what do they need actually, and what is their benefit out of your research. This is something we have to ask more often, actually.
This dilemma. It's a big dilemma. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. Now I would like to turn my attention to the audience. Do we have some? Nina has a microphone here, and we would like to have. I cannot see very easily. It's too dark. But can you raise your hand if I guess you have reflected on some of the information you got here this evening? Yeah, please.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for an excellent evening with very nice presentations. My name is Marius Korsnes, and I also work at NTNU. And I was wondering a little bit about the narrative aspect. I have two questions, one more general and one specific. The narrative part of your stories, of course, one of my concerns today is that the sustainability narratives have been sort of hijacked by corporate interests, like you mentioned, Hanya, and other interests that are sort of mainstreaming it back to just being about more consumption and so on. So I was just wondering, to what extent do you feel like also partly your role is to deconstruct those narratives versus also constructing new forms of sustainability narratives, which I feel like you're doing today. So that was the first more general question, and the second is for Theo. I have a question about your findings. Maybe you haven't gotten so far yet, but when you have a PhD position like yours, where you can critically research sustainability program at a huge university, to what extent do you feel like you can actually be critical enough to this type of program when the drive to tell a success story that you're sort of also part of is very strong, and it is also possible that this has not been a great success for sustainability. So I'm just curious about your perspectives on that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Shall we start with the last question, or because I thought it was a long and a big issue? Do you want to? We take the last one since that is clear in memory, and you can
sure.
repeat the first question. Yes, Theo. Yeah, and then Hanya after. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I've been able to be as critical as I can or as I need to be, and I came in from a kind of scientific field that tends to be very critical on the questions of sustainability, and so one of maybe the challenges for me was to try to not only be critical but try also to do justice to the kind of work that is done. And I would say most of the literature in my field, political ecology, is very critical of approaches that are very techno-optimist, focused on ecological modernization that would favor more technologies for economic growth. And so part of the work has been to try to understand how come that there is so much focus also in a university like NTNU. There are reasons focus on those approaches, perhaps as opposite or with an unequal balance with the disciplines that are represented tonight on the stage. So yeah, try to remain critical, but also be just in a way in that critique. And when it comes to whether, for instance, the SUSRES program has managed to bring this interdisciplinary collaboration and maybe those more transformative approaches to sustainability, it's still halfway through. So there is probably more that will come as the project goes. But there's there's a lot of challenges that doing a project like mine and following a program like this it helps to see them, to see what kind of constraints happens when we try to engage with these efforts. And part of the goal of my research at the end of maybe the next 2 years will be to come back to NTNU and say, okay, we learned from this experience, and this is what we can do differently. Perhaps it will help. Surely it will help. But I generally think that, of course, it depends on the expectations, and I will conclude here. It depends on the expectations that you have at the beginning of such a program. But there's still some good efforts that have been made. Some solutions have been identified. And I think if there's a message for NTNU is that they should try to continue even if it costs money and it represents a risk sometime in terms of investment. It is worth it to try to do this kind of research.
Yeah, thank you, Theo. Is it also a possibility that your conclusion will be that this project hasn't been brought very much to the interdisciplinary sustainability solutions at all? Or is this?
No, I mean, I think to be honest, as of now, there's a lot of challenges which I try to speak to actually getting to this collaborative part. And in a lot of projects, most of the work, also because of the requirement of being a PhD and doing your doctoral education, has been within their own project still. And this speaks to what I was saying about what were your expectations. Because even if there's not necessarily so much collaboration as of now, and again, that might happen in the future, interdisciplinarity still happens. And I was sitting in one meeting, and you could see it unfolding in the conversation of people about giving feedback on one person's research. And it's like, yeah, have you thought about this? In my field, we look at this in this way, and I think it would be fruitful for this. And so even if there's not necessarily those collaboration that one could have expected for now from this project, interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity happens in multiple ways.
Yeah, good. Okay, Hanya, you will try. Do you remember the question? Yeah,
sort of. But
yeah.
I just want to maybe follow up on what you've just said. I really I was advised by the organizers not to do a big acknowledgement, which is usually in my case, half an hour. But I just want to give these students a big shout out because they're doing in 3 years something across disciplines which regular students in a regular monodisciplinary program cannot do. So they're already doing stuff that's transdisciplinary and really innovative and really working quite generously. And I don't know if you know, but we're actually not from the same team. And you wouldn't tell, right? You couldn't tell because we've actually managed to get together and meet each other. They will recite poetry if they're asked. I will come to their talks. And so I think that this is something really that we need to acknowledge, that the capacity building of this sustainability research scheme is extraordinary. And we have to think about solutions and impact, not only short term. I mean, these folks are going to go into the world and they will be doing work differently. They will be doing research differently. So that's very important. As to the sustainability narratives question, of course, you know, as a literary scholar, you know, I've been thinking, it's everywhere. You know, Nobel Prize books, winning books. It's also in austerity narratives. It's also in AI propaganda of climate denial. So it means everything and nothing. But I think what was striking to me as I was getting ready for this project and other ones on storytelling is actually when I went to these very interesting research spaces in the US and here, and I hear scholars saying about moon colonization. They are talking about moon extraction. That's the story. They are believing that the techno hero is going to come with his gadgets and save the world and make it great again, right? We are just witnessing how this duo pulled out of the Paris Agreement, one country that really has quite an impact on our climate on a planetary scale. So I think one thing to me that was very important is realizing that I work with investigative scholars, researchers who are working and doing incredible job. But when I ask them to tell a story of the future, is this the story of this guy with gadgets in the future? And so I think for us, it's very important to go back to the drawing board, invite different people, sit together, and do this playful stuff. Let me hear what you have to say. How would you imagine the future? How does a 13-year-old girl, you know, in Substadt imagine the future? What is it different or similar to a story of a different kid somewhere else, you know, in Nairobi? Because we all already are living in the futures that were made possible by other people's generous belief that we can be here. So co-creation is fundamental, right? And sometimes the solutions are actually quite simple. The other thing about the analysis, again, because I do have a regular job, so I'd have to do the proper traditional research as well. I'm not just hanging out with these cool kids doing all kinds of interesting things in the streets. I do that as well, and in addition. Media literacy, completely neglected at this university. Tech literacy, neglected at this university. And I think it's very important that both the humanists need to know something about digital tools and technology, and also the technologists, the designers, need to read a bit more. They need to understand how people tell stories. So I would say the analysis part is very important. And at the same time, it's not just our responsibility here, it's also an infrastructural problem, right? We have very few schemes or infrastructural support system at the university to do this kind of work, where we are not told that what we're doing is actually bad research, right? But that what we are doing in the community is actually not knowledge making, it's playtime, it's outreach. Actually, no, I am learning a lot about the community when I go and work in different urban environments about poverty, about housing problems, about sustainability, about discrimination, exploitation, all other things. So I think that this is really, it's not one or the other. We need to do both. And I think for that, you know, I look up, although I can't see anybody, you know, to the leadership of this university. Please support this work because it's about survival, it's existential.
Yeah, and we make a bit shorter comments now.
Yeah,
So
it's very, very short, in fact. And I just wanted to say that I can relate also with the sort of strong feelings that many of us here had with even the word sustainability. And for us as literature scholars, like the word, that fraction has a lot of weight. And I feel like there's been a lot of attempts perhaps on giving different twists? Is it critical? Is it ethical? Is it sustainability? Like there's a lot of efforts in doing that. But I think that it's important as well that we remember that this co-option is always going to be present. I mean, we have Amazon who built an empire selling books. So it's just thinking these dramatic things and how storytelling is also co-opted by so many like demagogues and, corrupting democracy, etc. All of these tools are available for the good guys and the bad guys as well. So I think that what's important is, like Hanya said, like focusing in these co-creative practices in which we're not isolated and thinking only in our own ideas, but really pushing forward, having this sometimes contradictory feelings and move forward. So in a way, like continue like fighting, as cheesy as it sounds, is the way to go. It's the only way to go.
Okay, then we open up for more questions from you. You're not curious about anything? No? Here we here we have one. Yeah. Good.
Thank you. My name is Martin. I come from SINTEF. So I work a lot on the technology part, but I'm curious. What are your targets group in your research? How do you achieve impact of your research? Do you work with specific companies and so on? I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who will start? Maybe we could have short comment from all of you.
Very quickly, I think
Yeah.
one of the things we always consider is that there are very different audiences for research. And, for me, my job as an educator is not just to teach students and researchers how to see the world like the corporation from the point of view of the corporation. I want them to know what the corporations want, but I don't want them to just think that this is the only research audience. And I think many students here, they actually work both with communities, but also with NGOs, and they work on behalf of many institutions. And of course, there are various schemes to how to assess this kind of success. But I think that also Parisa was mentioning, it's very important to understand that some of these evaluation schemes about impact, what is the impact of the poem that ignites a revolution? I mean, how do you measure that? I think we have to also be very careful that we cannot quantify everything in the same way. And also, we want to work with you at SINTEF as well.
Yeah, have a few comments more?
Yeah, I think for my research, I definitely hope that it can be informed about policy making. I come from a public policy background. My master is in public policy, so I care deeply about what we can do to improve the situation while we still want more renewable energy to phase out fossil fuel. But we want to build it in a way that is just and inclusive, which means that everybody gets a share from the benefit for the project. So like for the indigenous people, they are not just sacrificing their ancestral land for the project and gets a meager compensation, and they are being like thrown to a life that they're struggling to adapt with. We have to really help them, to bring them together to really work, while we want to build more, if we cannot stop building more, what can we do so that everyone benefits? So hopefully my research and what I gather from people on the ground can help to inform the policymaker what they have to do. But I kind of think that they already know what they have to do. It's just that they are not doing it. They could say that the cost is high. They could say that, I have done this and this. But, I think more important is that you really listen carefully to what they really need, not crafting a plan that we think that what they need for them to, adapt to this new life, but, work with them together to kind of see what they really need to help them to, move forward, not to just like, oh yeah, you're coming along, like, just follow me, and then you are like lost And then when you try to tell them what is happening on the ground, like, I select this area because there is a forest, but now the forest is clear. So what do? I have no means to find food and I have no money. So, and it is so far away from town. What do? Like, you are throwing people in this life that they cannot choose. Like, you have to give people choice, and I think the policymakers know what they have to do. They just have to do it.
So this raises a new question, because many people, individuals, me, for example, and a lot of company leaders and so on, we know a lot, but why don't we do what we really know? We know what to do, but we don't do it. What is this schisma? How do we get it's not enough to get the knowledge in the head of leaders or politicians or anything. How can we make them do what they really should do?
I think because nobody is watching them doing what they are doing. Like, for the case I presented to you just now, the utility companies claim that, we have this livelihood restoration plan, we give them compensation, we are helping them to, moving them to this resettlement area, and we are going to give them clinic and, schools. But then what is actually happening on the ground? Like, you see, I've seen that people live in this house, the pillar is hollow in the middle. The quality of the house is not that good. And then they don't even get the clinic promised to them after 10 years. So
we need more of controlling mechanisms.
It's but they claim that they have engaged through this, free, prior, and informed consent principle, and they are even selling their renewable energy certificate for that. So, they really needs to have people to go to the ground and see what is happening on the ground, and to show that, no, you have not really done what you promised to do, and, to kind of force them to take action.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm taking too long.
Okay. So we see this is a schisma. Did you get answer for your question? Yeah. Okay. Do we see more hands here? Then Can I
just maybe say something?
Yeah, okay.
Maybe
there's a new question here. Yeah, just a short comment.
Yeah, not a practical, just maybe the answer to the impacts. I think that a lot of folks here are working in policy. They're representing, just going to the various UN meetings. So we're doing research which has an impact. We're building kind of connections across the community, but there's also a lot of work being done in policy. And then I think the other thing to keep in mind in terms of impact is the public opinion. I think that the public opinion does shift policy and politics. And so I think that as the research university, we've abdicated our responsibility to shape public opinion. We've lost the storytelling war, right? It's gone, right? So I think that it's also very important to, even if we don't understand that this is actually very impactful, it actually very much is. So I just would like to give kudos to these students who are actually doing extraordinary work.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We take a question here.
Short reflection. I'm Osmund, partly working here at NTNU with experts in team and some other things, partly on NMBU with transdisciplinary master program in urban agriculture, and least but not last, I've been in Pådriv in Oslo for several years as a chairman of the board, and I was intrigued by what you said lastly. Why don't you do something? Because I think you are touching. We know almost everything. We just have to do it, and that's actually the ideology in Pådriv. Cut the words, do something, and also according to sustainability. I don't miss, but you have touched it, but I think we have to lift words or concepts like equality, fairness, justice, and symmetry. Because out there on the street, very many feel that, okay, it's not just, it's not fair. So do any of you have any reflections on that, actually? Because I love the word sustainability. Many people say, oh, it's outworn, it's just scrap it, but you have to fill it with meaning, actually. So,
Yeah, that's
please.
a good. Who will give a comment here?
No, I just said that that was very beautiful, and I just want to thank you also for making that intervention. And indeed, I think that we all know that the crisis that we have is not of facts, is a crisis of imagination, stories, of action and moving things. And like you said, like, feelings are not cheesy. Feelings are the engines that really make us do things. So in a way, like this gas skins that you were talking about is about creating these kind of spaces in which we get fired up, basically, to do the things that need to be done, be it like being on the street or protest or writing to politicians. So I feel that we need more spaces like this one to discuss topics that, like you said, touch us, like the touchy feelings as well in many ways. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Because we see now, I talk to many people describing that this word bærekraft in Norwegian and sustainability, it is being diluted in a way and filled with everything and nothing. And people are losing interest, and some are even laughing or making ridiculous things about sustainability. And how can we make sustainability as relevant as it is required for solving all the dramatic increasing challenges we have in climate, nature, diversity, and not to talk about the social inequity? Who is responsible for this? Is it politicians, leaders, individuals, or how are we going to place a responsibility?
I think it's also very important to go back to the United Nations Sustainable Goals, as problematic as they were in many regards, that they actually brought us the language of justice, right? And said, okay, it's not just an environmental crisis or a development economic crisis, it's actually about equity. Let's figure out if everybody gets access to education. We have to talk about gender equality. We have to take care of indigenous communities. So there is this language already there, right? And I think that it's also it's upon us as educators, administrators, students to implement really and to keep in mind, that justice is actually at the core of it. And again, I would just say I would second Isabel's comments that we normally, when we talk about environmental justice, we don't get very good comments from the audience. We're just like the oddballs. So we really appreciate that you notice that, every single one here of the presenters is actually very committed to the question of justice and fairness and equity in how we do the work and what we publish. And maybe more practically because I'm a senior, I'm an elder here, but I think for students who are just starting, my understanding is that we need to teach them how to do research ethically, and that's a starting point. And oftentimes we don't. We just tell them, okay, Theo, 5 articles in next year. And that's not the way to do it.
Is it a question of, do we have to change the concept or the words here? Right? So change a concept and make a new story and a new concept for making more awareness?
I think it's not the concept. It's more like that we lost trust in the word. At least for me personally, because sometimes it feels a bit like as if the UN sustainability goals are just a nice to have on paper, but I don't see actions following these goals, actually. Maybe we have to find ways to gain trust again in this concept and really show what it can mean, actually. And again, when I'm talking about trust, it's all about relationships, independent of with whom I'm talking, whether I'm talking with communities or with my supervisor or with an institution like NTNU or SINTEF or whatever. It's always about relations, and they are the basis of those actions that actually have an impact and the way how they have an impact. And if I, as a member of a community, have the idea that I'm not heard, like, I mean, in Shaofui had a really good example. There were so many standards of sustainability, and this community was actually only informed about transformations, but they were not really included in this whole process. And this is something that fundamentally has to change on all levels in our society, not only in doing research, but also in companies and policy making and everywhere, actually.
Okay, I stop you there because Isabel, yeah?
I just wanted to say, sort of give you like a brief answer. In my humble opinion, it's no. I wouldn't give up on a concept, because the same way that we haven't given up on a concept like justice, even though we have talked about it for a long time and we still live in times of horrendous wars and a lot of injustices. But keep it in mind, the goal that environmental redressing, like working for environmental sustainability or environmental harmony or different relations, together with working with ethics and human beings, that's still fundamental. So maybe we're tired, and obviously we come from humanities and poetry. We know repetitions like actually have an effect on our brains and sometimes becomes tiring, but at the same time, there is a power in repeating this in a way that we reclaim this concept into its really deep meaning. And I'm not talking about the original and use definition, but actually the meaning that we need to address all these issues simultaneously to sort of advance, and I'm using this word carefully, but move as a society in a way that no one is left behind. That's fundamental.
Is there one, yeah?
I completely agree with what my colleague said, and I would just add on Isabel said, saying that sustainability in itself as a concept is not necessarily the problem, but it needs to be clarified, because now it's really easy to be sustainable, do something that contributes to sustainability, and it gives this kind of political, this veil of political neutrality to a lot of actions. And it's, in a way, it's become a cheap way to become morally right. So what should we do? It's like this concept should be clarified. It should serve for more like signposting. It should not be. It should not be able for. It should not allow an oil major, for instance, to become greener or sustainable because they do some renewable energy when it only accounts for less than 10% of their economic activity, for instance. And so, for instance, what could be useful is to be more specific about it, insist on the fact that a sustainable action is an action that is within the planetary boundaries, and then you can already sort some of the solutions, some of the technology, some of the development models as well that are sustainable and not sustainable. We should prioritize the fact that it's about well-being as well, above any other measure, because economic growth in economic prosperity doesn't necessarily contribute to well-being. And to introduce this dimension of justice, it should also be inclusive well-being within planetary boundaries, because we have to let the people, different people from different regions of the world, the possibility to define what is well-being for them as well.
Okay, then we have a last short question from the audience. Hello.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Hania, for inviting me, and this is very intriguing discussion. Thank you, all the participants. I sense some kind. I work for DNV in energy transition, so kind of I feel some kind of low-scale technology bashing is done here, but that's okay. I understand. But it's more of a suggestion that you should involve in such kind of group discussion more people who are making decisions on policies, challenges people who are working in energy transitions, who are what they are facing. That has not been included at all in the discussion, that why they are coming up hydropower kind of solution. Then, so the first thing is to bring the other half in the picture as well for kind of bring the holistic solution. The another one is related to accountability, because that's also kind of briefly discussed just before this, that this is from 1980s framework was shown where sustainability's definition has been taken and things. So it's not for the first time we are hearing this or first time we are getting funding to solve something. If in 2023, 43 years, and we are still more or less on the same basic level of things. So I feel a bit pessimistic that without including all party and without making them accountable for their action, we can kind of have some changes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was a long comment, but okay, we take two short responses here.
Thank you very much. I thank you for the comment on the, from the authority and NVE side. I did understand the constraint of the the government body that is doing a lot of this work. But part of my research, it really focused on how these old hydropower plants license condition is being reviewed. And one of the questions that is being contested in this revision is that, do we need to release water back to the river for the salmon, the sea trouts, or the other species in the ecosystem? And then this has been a big question that is in this revision. And I think NVE play a very important role to ensure that we can have a bit more water back to the river to restore this ecosystem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last comment here.
I don't want to be last, but I want to say something. Yeah. First of all, that this event is the last event of this incredible research project that did include a lot of folks working with technology and industry. And I think that I didn't also want you to leave with an impression that we're technophobic, but also we're not technophilic, right? So I think that we're all bringing the conversation back to the people. And in various projects, because these are projects that last 3 years, these folks really are barely surviving with the work that they're doing. In other projects, we are working closely with the industry, right? And we understand that, we don't want to be in the realm of ideas, but we want to also be in the realm of real life solutions and structural changes. And I wanted to say something about what Thea was talking about, abandoning the language of sustainability and rather not. I think it was Astra Taylor's book on democracy, and she says, you might not like the term, but you're going to miss it when it's gone. So I would want to say that I teach at a university where I can use the word sustainability and I will not be fired. I can use the phrase climate change. If you were in Texas, you couldn't do it at a public institution. So I think we have moved somewhere in some places, and in other places we haven't.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we are now expanding our time. Okay, sure.
Okay, sorry, just really quickly, I just wanted to highlight that to remember Isabel's presentation, which beautifully showed that maybe the discussion on technology needs to change, because it's technology for sustainability doesn't need to be capital intensive, doesn't need to require a lot of metals and materials nor energy. It can be local technologies based on nature. It can also be more sort of political and social technologies of how we make communities as well. So it's not a technophobic or an anti-techno conversation here. It's also about expanding the discussion of technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Padisa, you also. Okay, very last.
Last week, when we met here, you were mentioning actually that books are your technology, right? And this is something that people might forget, because when we had the first books pressed, that was a world-changing technology, and we have to keep this in mind. We are not technology-free, or literature is not technology-free. They just have another technology. And this is what Theo also mentioned shortly in his talk, that we have different languages, and we have to be open to understand each other. And then it's also easier to work together and to find solutions together.
Because in academia and in all other branches also, we have something we call tribe language. And when you put one from each tribe together and they say the same word, it is not necessarily that they see the same picture inside their head. That is experienced, and usually they see totally different pictures in the head. And that's why we have to meet and to make relations, and I think also a lot of people, both in NTNU and in many other places, are doing this. But as our guest here mentioned, I think we are at the point of to build trust. Maybe we need more activity that shows us and make that we really have a reason to trust leaders, politicians, authorities, rectors, teachers, whatever. So I feel that all your answers now, it also points to the responsibility for this. It's mentioning politicians and leaders and also individuals. Yeah, all these layers. UN, SDGs have mentioned them a lot of times. It doesn't help just to make 17 SDGs, sustainable the goals that UN decided. We have to fill it with meaning and with activity that gives meaning. Yeah. So now we know all and everyone what to do when we leave this hall. So we can just imagine one activity that we are going to do tonight or tomorrow. Then we have a good final here. Thank you for coming, and thank you to all the candidates. Hanna, as you said, we are a very special group here because usually they are from the same project, but these are from 3 different projects. And they didn't say hello to each other before they met here in the group. So you are really going to have a good grade for listening to the tribe languages you have had in each silo. So congratulations. And then I would just say we have now had the 8th group. We have left 5 groups in the Sustainable Research Project, and 2 of them will come in February 24 and 25, and then you will meet people researching in the health branch, and that is also a huge landscape, how to make the medical diagnostic, the hospital activities more sustainable, because like it is today, it's not sustainable in 10 or 20 years more. And there is 3 more to come in March and April. So have still a very good evening, and thank you for coming.